Hello, I'm Welton Gaddy, president of Interfaith Alliance, host of State of Belief Radio. I'm sharing with you a commentary that I did on State of Belief Radio. It was bound to happen. At one time, my anger was sufficient to make me think that when it did happen, I would laugh. But there was no laughing this past week when I began to read reports coming out of the evangelicals meeting in Texas for the purpose of consolidating support for one Republican presidential candidate that could beat Mitt Romney. Well, there were even charges of stuffed ballot boxes at the evangelical confab and deliberately waiting for some people to leave the meeting before calling for a second vote on a consensus candidate. I felt a twinge of anger when I heard the reports, but mostly sadness. Unfortunately, the broadside against religion was justified because, finally, politically oriented ministers went too far in cloaking partisanship in the garb of spiritual gospel and Christian morality. The whole thing evoked a rush of memories that I was perfectly satisfied never to call up again. My mind went back to the late 1970s when Paul Pressler, the judge who hosted the recent meeting in Texas, along with Paige Patterson, a minister in Texas, announced that they had a strategy which would allow them in no more than a decade to take over the Southern Baptist Convention and change the leadership in all of its agencies and seminaries to guarantee conservative leaders. That movement, which I came to call political fundamentalism, used a manipulation of theological issues and of church loyalty to advance purposes firmly latched onto interests in politics, money, and power. Let me give you a little context for what I'm saying. At the time of Pressler's and Patterson's attempted takeover, I was a leader in the Southern Baptist Convention. Then, this body was staunchly committed to church-state separation. No one even thought about bringing politics into a church. In fact, most Baptists kept their distance from politics. I knew Patterson personally and Pressler by reputation. I was aware that if they were successful, this organization that I loved would be changed and our greatest strengths would be reduced to the status of weaknesses if they survived the coming assault at all. At first the whole thing seemed laughable. Taking over the Southern Baptist Convention to get rid of liberals. Look, it would have been difficult to find a classic liberal anywhere in the Southern Baptist Convention. Across the years, fundamentalists and more progressive thinkers in the SBC had worked together because of a common commitment to religious freedom and cooperation among believers. But things were changing. Pressler and Patterson wanted no such cooperation. Division would better serve their agenda, which was political, not spiritual, or even much theological. The political fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention happened, just as they said it would happen. Akin to precinct organizers, local pastors recruited and bussed into convention centers on the day of the elections of the convention president, people, children and adults to whom they had given instructions on for whom to vote. A few of us attempted to stop this political movement. We started early and we worked long hours vigorously. But some of the harshest criticism leveled at us came from our friends, denominational leaders whose jobs we were trying to protect, and the way of cooperation that allowed all of us to work together. Naive idealists call the whole movement a tempest in a teapot that would never have much impact. After the decade of the strategy that worked, all of those former leaders had lost their jobs, and the entire convention had a new agenda. And all of this happened without most pastors ever telling members of their congregations what was happening to their convention. Convention meetings became sites for building support for presidential candidates like Pat Robertson. When Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford were campaigning against each other in a presidential election year, officers of the convention invited Gerald Ford to address the convention and decided to extend no invitation to their fellow longtime Southern Baptist Jimmy Carter. Now, if anyone had not seen that the agenda of the power wielders was political rather than spiritual, all doubts should have been removed at that point. So now, in January of 2012, the news out of Texas and the evangelical leadership meeting that took place there as Paul Pressler's guests catapulted me back to the nausea-inducing events of the late 70s and early 80s. What Martin Marty once described to me as the baptistification of Catholicism and the Catholicization of Baptist evangelicals took its toll and distinguished this Baptist convention so sharply from its historic Baptist tradition that the Baptist name hardly seemed to fit this convention anymore. But of course, everyone can call themselves whatever they please, whether that is really what they are or not. When you enter the political arena for partisan purposes, you become a politician, like it or not, whatever you describe as your motivation. Few people will listen to your moral, spiritual rationalizations about your activity. Your actions speak louder than your words. Seeking to build a block of partisan voters for the Republican primaries is, by definition, raw politics. And so, ministers involved in such an effort not only bring criticism to themselves, but to religion itself. And I take exception to that. A church, synagogue, or mosque can take part in partisan political campaigns. All they have to do is forfeit their tax-exempt status as a religious organization and conduct their campaigns with money not taken from an offering plate. But no, the guys in Texas wanted to have it both ways, to be involved in a religious movement and also be political power brokers. So, news reports talk about evangelicals blaming one another for voting irregularities, some saying that a Catholic in the meeting was the cause of all of the trouble. Look, how can this be good for religion? It's strange, isn't it? So many of the Republican candidates for the presidency this year felt called by God to seek the office. But the ministers seeking to assure the defeat of one of them, ironically, one who didn't claim to be called by God to the office, either didn't hear the same message from God or they just didn't listen to God at all. The would-be candidate makers listened only to the power brokers who divided, then captured the Southern Baptist Convention, caused rifts among Presbyterians, United Methodist and Missouri Synod Lutherans. They listened only to the religion-cloaked political partisans who want more control in the Republican Party and ultimately want to rule this nation. The authors of our Constitution tried to prevent this. Many of us have worked hard for a proper separation of religion and partisan politics. Today, I weep both for religion and for our nation.